Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Okay, so we're on step 7 tonight. We are in the 12 and 12 doing step 7. We just spent 4 weeks on step 6. And I think we'll pray first, but we will start on page 70. And then I'll do a little intro into step 7 and kind of tie some things into what we've already done. Creator. Thank you, Creator, for this beautiful windy day. Just really grateful today for my life and just personally, Creator. I'm trying to quit smoking again, so I asked for some help. I don't really feel like quitting, actually, but I got to, and I really need your help. Also, if you could just watch over everyone on the screen today and, keep our minds open, keep us growing and learning and going through the tough parts of life and recovery to get closer to you. Creator, I ask that you remove from me all the things that are blocking me from serving you and your kids. I ask for you to relieve me of everything that I think I know about you today, about the program, about my fellows, and about God, you, God, so that I can have a new experience as I've never been here before. This is a new day, a new experience. I ask, Creator, that you give me the words and the experiences and the ability to tie things together in a good way through this literature of step 7, which is my most favorite step of the program. I thank you for my friend Janine, as she sits beside me every week and donates her time to service to try to help in between all the other service she does for all the women in the program. Creator, I thank you for everybody online and just the ability to be healthy and happy and live my best life today because of you, God, and because of the program. Thank you. Hi.
Oh, God, thank you for being close to me today. From the minute that I woke up, we had people checking in. And today the grief was pretty bad. And thank you for giving me someone who can feel this painful, because I loved so deeply. And for what you've done for my kids. Like today I was making supper with one arm, and Acadia and Maze were playing in the living room, and she came and opened the fridge for me and hugged me, and everything's just come full circle. And in so many ways, I just wish that my grandma could see, but I think she actually had to be, it had to go this way for it to be like it is now. So many conversations that you give me back. Thank you. Thank you for Bill and for my friends. But days like this, I have friends that can support that for me, so that I can keep getting to the next thing and showing up for the next thing the best that I can. And thank you for everybody on the screen, for everybody that is not on the screen but should be. And for the next chapter that's unfolding. Thank you. Amen.
Okay. So we are on step 6 tonight, or step 7 tonight. My apologies. So anyone who's new here, this isn't like a big book study, the conventional style. Like, it's not a Joe and Charlie big book study. This is a study based on the experience of my life and my sponsorship and Janine's life and Janine's sponsorship. There's a lot of interpretation of the literature done by us, mostly by me, but Janine aligns with a lot of what I say, and she brings an awesome female perspective to what we're doing. What I want to kind of talk about before we start is what this step is and what it's actually not, in my opinion. Because you're going to hear a lot of things in the rooms about what step 7 is. And one of the things that you're going to hear, step 7 is the same as step 6. As I look at the literature and I kind of dissect what the literature is saying, these step 6 and 7 are not the same. They're totally different steps. And when we look at the step 3 prayer, God, I offer myself to you to build with me, do with me as thou wilt, relieve me of the bondage of self, take away my difficulties so that I may better do thy will. It's asking us to do something there in that step 3 prayer. It's only an offering, and may I do thy will. May I is a possibility. When you look up the word may, it means possibility. It doesn't actually say that I'm fucking doing anything really there yet. It's saying that I wish to. So then as we kind of go through the rest of the steps, the 4, we kind of expose the defects in our life, the difficulties, you could say, the bondage of self, and we do the 5 and we see that even highlighted even more. And we see what actually runs our life. And we see what is actually the cause of our drinking. So we're looking at the causes and conditions of our drinking and our failure at life. But actually through the behaviors that we exhibit, we fail at life and we need to drown it out with drinks or drugs. So then we kind of move out of that 4 and 5 with a whole bunch of data and information. We go into step 6. Why we spent basically 8 hours on step 6 is because, in my opinion, step 6 is the most important step. You have to be super willing to allow God to build with you and do with you as he will. You know, understanding that I'm the actor, and my acting in step 3 through my life comes out in all of these behaviors that I learn in my step 4. And I can see all of these behaviors. I can see all this acting. I can see basically all this unauthentic self manifesting itself in various ways. And that's what defeats me. You know, in the step 4, it says being convinced that self manifests itself in various ways is what defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. So we looked at the resentments and the fears and the sex conduct or relationship conduct, but that's only common stuff. So why we spent so much time on step 6 is because we went more into the subtlety of the defect of character, the subtlety of self. And it's really important to, like, I'll quote another line here and I can describe it this way. In step 12, there's a line in the book and it says, faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, it must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. So the idea of faith alone, it's insufficient. The concept of God, insufficient. The theory of God, insufficient. And if God is only an idea that your ego attaches to, then this isn't going to fucking happen for you. It must be accompanied by self-sacrifice. Understanding self is the key to that line. Self-sacrifice. That doesn't mean I go around and help people. That's the unselfish constructive action. Through the self-sacrifice, it's an act of altruism. It's not easy to perform because all of our habits and ideas and emotions are embedded in the way that we've been running our lives. But if I don't change it, get the psychic change like it talks about in the doctor's opinion, there is very little hope of his recovery. But on the other hand, as strange as this may seem, if I can do that, and if I can get the psychic change, I don't need to struggle with not drinking. And then the vitality of that line, you know, faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, to give you life. The vitality of life comes through self-sacrifice. And then the natural path of a human being, because we're actually designed that way, is to serve through unselfish constructive action. But we have to get rid of all that shit. So essentially what I'm saying is step 6 is the pain of learning how to do God's will. It's the humiliation of the ego accepting certain things about itself that it doesn't want to accept. When we accepted that we were alcoholic, finally, that was fucking humiliating. And for me, I remember when I accepted step 2, that was humiliating because I'm very self-sufficient. I did a lot of good things in my life based on my own self-will. And then you ask me to turn my will and my life over to this thing because I'm so broken. That's also humiliating. And then I look at the 4 and the 5, there's a lot of humiliating things in there that I have to admit. And I had to look at it from an entirely different angle. And it took some time to look at it from an entirely different angle because my pride and my fear were so thick that it didn't want to do that. And these trenches of the way that I've lived my life are so thick and deep that I didn't want to change and I didn't know how to change. So step 6 is like a willingness that's at a really high level. And we have to open our mind and we have to be rigorously honest, or this stuff doesn't work and you won't find the vitality in life that you're looking for. And you don't even know what it is that you're looking for because the experience of God isn't something we can intellectualize. It's only something you can experience, and the experience just grows and grows and grows, which is why it's such a beautiful journey. So as we learn through the step 6 how to do God's will, we suffer humiliation and we suffer pain. But what's the premise at the end of that we're trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve a desire to seek and do God's will that we kind of acknowledged when we did the step 3 prayer. But as time goes on, as we practice the practical application of what's in this book, especially in step 10 in the big book, we start to self-sacrifice and we start to get placed in a position of neutrality. And we start to want to serve. And then life gets pretty good. So then what we're achieving is step 7. We're achieving the step 7 humility. I learn it in step 6 and I desire it in step 7. And then the most profound result of all as I do this work is the change in our attitude towards God. He's no longer a guy that I just lean on when I'm fucking hurting. He's no longer a theory in my life. I walk in constant companionship with God and he makes my decisions for me and I work with him and I do everything that I can with God in my pocket. And all my thoughts are based in God. And we're talking about love here, right? We're talking about love. So that's really what step 7 is. And why I say all this is because it really goes from like step 6. It talks about step 6, it goes into 7. Talks about step 6, goes to 7. All through the literature. This literature anyway. And I'll finish with this before I let Janine have a few minutes to kind of describe a few things if she wants. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry out step 6 and 7. Really, when you're doing your prayer and meditation and you're seeking God's guidance on what to be and how to do this and asking for help, we're actually praying for knowledge of his will for us to power to carry out step 6 and 7. The step 6 is the relinquishment, the hard, heavy lifting work. And the step 7 is the surrender. And once I work a step 10, then that step 11 ideal can really come to the surface. But it takes time and it takes commitment, which is why in the step 3 prayer and the step 7 prayer, it says, may I do thy will as I go from here to do your bidding. Amen. And I'll compare the step 3 and step 7 prayer later so you can see the big difference. But the step is the fucking bomb. This is what we're looking for. And we'll kind of prove that through the literature as we go along here. Anyway.
Well, yes, I will say that when I met you, you were telling me all of that. I was thinking as you were talking, how was any of that sticking? And like how I was making sense of it enough to do what this was calling me to do.
And I suppose because I was at such a place where like I had tried AA before and I came up short, but I really did think that I did it. And in fact, I did the amends part. Like I did step 9 so well. Like I got good results. And I think, resting on the laurels, I didn't know I was, because I didn't understand step 10, and I had some prayer and meditation. So it was kind of piecemealed, but I did the best that I could, I think, with what I was trying to do. Um, and so when I had went to treatment there and I was going through the book and I stopped at those paragraphs and thinking there's got to be more than this. So I'm getting into the 12 by 12 and I had met you and you were telling me all of those things. And I suppose one of the turning points for me with step 6 was just the talking about, like, if God can restore an alcoholic to sobriety by removing the obsession, then why not apply that same idea to all of our defects? And so, like, that proposition in step 6 and the 12 by 12, I'm like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And then the next thing that I think for a lot of us in the rooms, it's that, the next grab is relationships. And was the next area of struggle for me. And so that was kind of what I saw as my glaring defects I could apply this stuff to. And I did. And like I've talked about this, that I didn't think that the obsession for this toxic relationship would ever be removed and that I could ever like overcome that, because it just felt like I'd been stuck in that place for so long. And so that was kind of that step 6 idea, that why not apply the same thing. And then I went through that uh, shot glass of self, the defects, glug, glug, glug. And I kind of put like step 4, 5, 6, 7, like as a 1, 2, 3 in my own mind, where I had to be convinced that any life run by me, like defects, self-will, was not going to be successful, and that I needed to find a different way. So when you were telling me, like you have to self-sacrifice, and that was confusing at first, but in my mind, I pictured it like it's not myself I'm sacrificing. My ego is moving out of the way. So it's like my egoic self is moving out of the way. So that looks like my fear, my resentment, my whatever I see, my defects coming up, that self I need to put aside for the good of others. And like it was haphazard, and I was, I struggled a lot with certain things. And but like the idea was there that I need to move out of my own way, and the concept of like you versus you. And I just had all these like things that helped me to navigate that. But where 7 made sense was that I got the result. So that was like the first attempt was that obsession about the relationship. And I didn't really know how it was going to go, but I was sober, and I believed you. So I thought it was going to work. But when it worked, I was like, And so through the process of like 10 and my relationship ideals and what would I do instead, like using the steps, I was able to overcome, like I did the alcohol, this obsession of the relationship. And then the result was, this is way better. And I got a glimpse of what 7 looks like, where it's like 6 is, I want this shit gone because it's causing me pain. And I don't want, it's like in my mind, that was a Judas apology. Like Judas was sorry, but only because he was hurting himself. He wasn't sorry he betrayed Jesus. And so I kind of had like that in my mind, where step 6 is like, I just don't want this pain anymore. I want the relief of it. But I wasn't just doing it because I wanted to do God's will. I wanted the pain gone. So step 6 was like the pain step. And then after that trial there, and the obsession for that toxic relationship was removed, I was like, geez, like, and this is better. And then I started to become like, my step 7 is you just reach for it, like it says, it doesn't have to take a long time. You can just reach for it voluntarily. Well, why would I want to reach for it voluntarily when I was doing all this stuff before? Well, because I've tried it now, because I didn't try it before, because I didn't know how to get out of my own way. And so once I tried it and I got a result, I was like, this is better. And now 7 to me is this knowing that if I just voluntarily reach, if I can get out of my own way, if I can spot this stuff and get out of my own way, that the result is going to be an easier, softer way, even though it doesn't feel like that in the moment. So that the idea of short-term pain of getting out of my own way, because that's uncomfortable and it's scary sometimes, that short-term pain is going to cause me the long-term gain versus being in self and not, self-sacrificing and acting in defects. That's a short-term gain for a long-term pain. So I have become convinced that step 7 is like, you just want to, because it's actually like, it's better for you, for everybody, and you feel closer to God.
Roger. And the difference between a defect and a shortcoming, my opinion again, a defect is something we'll still struggle with, that we're not wholly willing to let go, and we still get some type of relief and value in it, and payoff out of it still. So it's a defect and it's hard to let go. That very same thing now turns into a shortcoming when you've surrendered and you want to let it go. And oftentimes when you get to the level of surrender, whatever the defect was that is a detriment to you, now you can use it as an asset. So how it looks is the ego really holds and tries to fight you with the defect. And once you've surrendered the ego, and although it may be hard, you're now working with way more God and way more love. And the humanness in you, in us, still allows some of these shortcomings to appear unbeknownst to us. But it's not the same, because there's such a level of honesty and integrity and willingness and open-mindedness when it came up that I didn't even see that I might have used it. And the humanness of me used that defect, but I'm like, oh shit. So I've now grown out of it, and I move forward past it as a shortcoming, and I don't hold on to the guilt anymore. And I know that I just learn as I go, and I still want to do God's will. So defect and shortcoming, quite different. Anyway, any questions before we go? Okay. Page 70, 12 and 12. Humility is the principle behind this. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider what humility is and what the practice of it can mean to us. So it's really starting off in a good way, right? It says, ponder, what is humility and what the practice of it is and what it can do for us. Indeed, the attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of AA's 12 steps. It's the most important principle that is the foundation of all the 12 steps. For without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. Nearly all AAs have found too that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than may be required for sobriety, they still haven't much of a chance of becoming truly happy. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose, or in adversity be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. So going back up to, unless they develop much more of this precious quality. So think about that. You have to develop more of the precious quality than may be required just for sobriety. Okay? Or you still haven't much of a chance of becoming truly happy. So the promise is, on the flip side of that, if you can develop much more of this precious quality, you can become truly happy. So to me, that's the first promise of step 7, is true happiness that comes from the attainment of more humility, which is more love and less ego. And without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose. So without more humility, I won't be living in purpose and be useful to God's kids, because I have a nature of selfish self-centeredness, and I'll still kind of live there. So I need to develop more of it, which means I go through the pain and I self-sacrifice and I relinquish more, so that I'm able to do the unselfish constructive action and live in purpose. So a lot of us are always looking for the purpose. What's our purpose? The purpose lies within the micro decisions and the micro moments of your life, where you do something different in that moment. And to fight through that challenge, sometimes take away my difficulties. That difficulty that's presenting itself in that micro moment, that's where the fucking purpose lies. And if you learn how to navigate that challenge and left to our own devices, we don't have the power. In that moment's when we call on God's power and we ask for that help. And then we get a little closer up the yardstick. We grow a little millimeter towards real humility. But the pain in relinquishing that in that moment isn't really fun, because maybe it's something that I'm used to getting that gives me a relief, like a piece of tail or watching a segment of porn, or, you know, throwing some money in the gambling, or maybe it's judging somebody, or maybe it's me sitting in self-pity, or maybe it's whatever it is for you. But the awareness of that moment, asking God to remove it, and oftentimes talking to somebody immediately, so you can look at the facts and see the facts, look at the truth about stock and trade, not your truth, because we have a inability to see the truth a lot of times, because we can rationalize and justify anything to suit our actions and our inaction. So as we can look at the causes and conditions, find the damaged and unsaleable good that we're working with that we can't see, and discard it promptly without regret. And then we're taking inventory, and a business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. So if we don't take that inventory, we get more broken and we get spiritually bankrupt, and we fall back into the old patterns. Okay. So without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose, or in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. That's what I want. There's another promise. If I can develop more of this through the hard pain and work of step 6, I can summon the faith that can meet any emergency. And after all, for if the alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through this work, step 6 work and self-sacrifice, he will not meet the certain trials and low spots in life ahead. And if he fails to work, he will certainly drink, and if he drinks, he will certainly die. And we may not die 6 feet under, but we're dying inside. We become a walking zombie on earth, and I'm dead inside, like I was for many years. Anyway, anything?
I was just trying to think of an example for that last line. And I think that a good one for me was, I guess, just getting here and just some things flipped upside down. I had some court involvement that was unexpected. And when I read that line, I see like, well, obviously, if I wasn't doing, it's obvious now, but if I would have read it before, I would have done the little things, I wouldn't have understood it. But without doing this stuff to a certain degree, when the emergencies in life come, I would have had no faith to take the big plunges that I needed to take in an emergency. I would have fallen back for sure on fear in a couple of different examples. Like there's a couple that I'm thinking of, but if I wasn't doing some of this, like in the day-to-day stuff before the emergencies happened, I wouldn't have had any faith to take the action that I needed to take. And I might have fell in on myself. So when it says, you know, like if we're not gonna be able to hit the trials and the low spots, and when emergencies come, we falter. That's what came up for me, and I understand it to read like that now. That's all.
10-4. Okay, humility as a word and as an ideal has a very bad time of it in our world. Not only is the idea misunderstood, the word itself is often intensely disliked. Many people haven't even a nodding acquaintance with humility as a way of life. So I want to kind of dissect that a little bit. So not only is the idea of humility misunderstood, and think about that. When you go to a meeting and the topic of humility goes on the board, everybody has a take and they have a crack at what they think humility is. You know, and we've heard them all, right? You know, being teachable and, you know, being humble and all these different things. But Bill W. describes humility as something very specific in here that actually encapsulates all of the things that we hear. So I really like that it says the idea is misunderstood. The word itself and is often intensely disliked. While a lot of people attribute humility as humiliation only, so they dislike the word. Many people haven't even a nodding acquaintance with humility as a what? As a way of life. So as a way of life is insinuating that this is an action. This is an action I must take. And most people don't even having a nodding acquaintance with humility as a way of life. And if it's the foundation principle of all of AA's 12 steps, through the practical application of the steps, and I don't mean the theory of the steps, I don't mean I guess what God's will is, and I don't mean that I self-will the principles into my affairs. I mean, I follow the practical application of the directions of the steps. I actually have humility working in and through me in a way that I need, and in a way that takes me to the fourth dimension. So much of everyday talk we hear, a great deal of what we read highlights man's pride in his own achievements. We can all relate with that. The world that we live in, the world of the material, is highlighting man's pride in his own achievements. I learned that as a kid. You know, look at all the trophies I won. Look at what you're doing. Son, you're doing great. You know, Bill, you're doing awesome, or whoever it is out there, right? It's all about us. And it's the foundation of self that we get indoctrinated into and built into in our society. You want to see more self? Let's go on Instagram. Let's go on TikTok. Let's go for a drive down 17th Ave and see all the ladies in self and all the guys in self. And let's go to the bar and you'll see self everywhere. Half of the people wearing the clothes that they wear aren't even wearing them because they really like them themselves. They like them because somebody else likes them. The cars that are driving around downtown, all the Lamborghinis and all the shit down here, these guys aren't driving that because they like it. They like the attention and the validation that they get, and they like the feeling of driving this car because everyone thinks something of them. But really, you know, the chick in the passenger seats probably could be a prostitute that he pays because he doesn't even have enough character to get his own. So we don't even really know what we're even actually looking at half the time in society. So, man's pride in his own achievements. With great intelligence, men of science have been forcing nature to disclose her secrets. The immense resources now being harnessed promise such a quantity of material blessings that many have come to believe that a man-made millennium lies just ahead. Poverty will disappear, and there will be such an abundance that everyone can have all the security and personal satisfactions he desires. The theory, here's the theory, seems to be that once everybody's primary instincts are satisfied, all the things that basically I want, there won't be much left to quarrel about. The world will then turn happy and be free to concentrate on culture and character. Solely by their own intelligence and labor, men will have shaped their own destiny. So in my own life experience, this is me, okay? I remember when my kids were little, I have 3 daughters, they're older now, and my wife, and then I ran my business, and I ran a very successful business. But I put all my attention on the business, the money, and the status, and the things that I owned that were shiny or big and nice. And I didn't put a lot of value really on the character. But if you came at me about my character, I would come right back at you because my whole character was based in pride. But I was the guy who I thought once my primary instincts were satisfied, I had the money, I had the house, I had all these things. I remember my kids saying, Dad, can we help the dogs? Can we help, you know, the homeless dogs? Can we help the homeless people? Can we help people in Africa? You know, those tearjerker commercials that used to come on. And I would say, once we get our shit figured out, kids, then we can help other people. And that was me. Then the world will turn happy and free to concentrate on culture and character. Solely by my own intelligence and labor, I will have shaped my own destiny. And I remember shaping that. And it was all based in self. But I didn't know any different because I was just driven by what I'd learned in society. And certainly no alcoholic and certainly no member of AA wants to deprecate material achievement. So that's not what we do also. This isn't about us deprecating the material achievement that other people do. Nor do we enter into the debate with the many who still so passionately cling to the belief that to satisfy our basic natural desires is the main object of life. That was the main object of my life, to satisfy these basic desires and get these things and try to make myself secure and my family secure. The thing about my security that I sought is I was never emotionally secure with who I was, because all the trucks and the material and the money, that was me. I wasn't actually me. I was the truck that I drove. I was the money that I had. I was a definite reflection of my bank account. When my bank account went right down, I felt like shit, because what are people going to think if they knew I had? And when my bank account was at zero and I was out there and, people would maybe say, you have lots of money. And then in my head, I'm thinking, fuck, I don't have any money. I'm just driving this nice truck, but my bank account's at zero. But I would play the act like, oh yeah, this is how we get her done kind of shit, right? But there's so much bullshit going on in my head and in my being. But we are sure that no class of people in the world ever made more of a mess of trying to live by this formula than alcoholics. For thousands of years, we had been demanding more than our share of security, prestige, and romance. And I did for sure. When we seemed to be succeeding, we drank to still greater dreams. When we were frustrated, even in part, we drank for oblivion. Never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. Boom. At about 2 years sober, I read that line right there. And I just started digging into the step 6 and 7 stuff, because I was burning down my life in my life by defective character. And I wasn't really happy, and I didn't know what was going on, but I knew the solution was in these books. So Jesse and I dug into 6, and then I started reading this. Maybe this was about 3 years in, actually, honestly. But I realized at that moment, never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. And I looked back in my life and I was like, dude, when you started your company, you thought $500,000 a year was going to be good. And it wasn't good enough when you made it. Then you figured $1 million a year would be good, and it wasn't good enough. And, nothing was enough. 1.5 million a year wasn't enough. 2 million wasn't enough. 3 million wasn't enough. The nicest truck that you ever had in your life wasn't enough. Like, nothing was enough. And why I tell all these things is because my wife, Shannon, she was my girlfriend at the time. She asked me to marry her. Without asking me to marry her, she wanted me to take that step because she's traditional, right? And I wouldn't ask her. And I would always say, you know what? We'll do that when everything's right. When everything is just right, when I have the right house, when I have the right amount of money, when our business is doing good, when these things are good, Shannon, I'll marry you. But I realized when I read that line, never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. I knew I was never marrying her, because nothing was ever going to be the way that I wanted it. Why? Because I'm alcoholic and I'm restless, irritable, discontent, and I always strive for more and more and more, and nothing's ever enough. And that is half of my problem, or most of my problem, as an individual who wasn't able to walk authentically on this planet because I wasn't who I was meant to be. So that's all I have on that. I'm going to keep reading this little piece unless you got something to say, but I am going to stop right here.
Go for it.
And all these strivings that we're talking about, these material strivings and, self-determined objectives, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of humility. Think of that, crippling handicap. So you might still be able to walk, but you have a leg that doesn't work. You can still get by, but it doesn't work properly. Maybe you got an arm that doesn't work. Like Janine's got an arm that's really messed up right now. This is a crippling handicap. She can get by, right? But sometimes we don't even know what the handicap is because we can't see it. So we just kind of struggle along. But the crippling handicap is the lack of humility. We had lacked the perspective to see what? The character building and spiritual values had to come first. And the material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. I had that all backwards. Quite characteristically, we had gone all out in confusing the ends with the means, instead of regarding the satisfaction of our material desires by the means by which we could live and function as human beings. We had taken these satisfactions to be the final end aim of life. Well, I learned a lot since I've been around here, and spiritual values and character building has to come first for us. And through that spiritual values and the character building and the surrender of a step 7 level, the things that I ever wanted, that I always tried to go grab and take and snatch out of life, they've actually been bestowed and delivered to me. And I'm still working on that too, right? But I don't feel like I'm missing much anymore because I'm good with who I am. And finally, when I burnt down my life and I lost my house, business, and everything, and I was left in that rubble, in the burning rubble of what my life was, and I sat there and I looked at it all smoldering around me, and my family's gone, my business is gone, all my workers are gone, all the people that I work for are gone, everyone's gone. And I looked at myself and I'm like, who the fuck are you now? Who are you now, Bill? Because I wasn't the things that I had, because the things that I had were gone. So I didn't even know who I was. And the friends and the people who I thought were my friends, they were nowhere around because I didn't realize that they were not focused on character and spiritual values either. There was a few people who kind of tried to hang in there, right? But because of my pride, I pushed them away. But there was no one left. And through that darkness, and I want to emphasize this, there's a line in the We Agnostics. It says, in the face of collapse, despair, in the face of total failure of our human resources, we find this new power, peace, and sense of happiness flow into us. This happened soon after we wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. So it's in the face of collapse and despair. It's in the darkness. That's where I find this power, this sense of power, happiness, sense of direction flow into me. But it only happens when I wholeheartedly surrender and I meet these simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of life. I was confused and baffled by life many times. I can find a way out through this relationship with God. And I'm kind of describing this as a big event in my life and how it burnt down. But it's actually every individual defect that you have. As we go down the road of inner turmoil through working step 6, we come to a lot of black spots. And we think that life's not treating us right and we should be further along or better. No, that's where that power, peace, and sense of happiness can flow into you. But you got to be willing to wholeheartedly meet the simple requirements, follow the dictates of your higher power, follow these things, and then you can get through it. And you can, those things won't even matter down the road. They don't matter for me today. What matters for me today is like being here and doing this, going to work and doing the same thing, being there for my kids, which I never was there for my kids. You could ask me and I'm like, oh yeah, I make the money. I make sure that they have everything. I'm always there for my kids. Fuck, I was absent as a father and my amends to them proved it. Because my one daughter said, you weren't even fucking around most of the time you were at home. You weren't really a great dad. So, okay. That fucking hurt. That's the humiliation, the pain that I had to learn from my daughter. And my wife, my ex-wife too. But anyway, things are different now. Anything?
Well, the process for me has been like, once I learned that, it's not the alcohol and that it's the problem's a spiritual problem. It's a malady or sickness that needs a spiritual solution. And I guess it was reinforcing what church, told me, and how the fundamental idea of God is in every man, woman, and child. And that made sense to me, that we're coming from somewhere. So there's a place that God should be. And if God's not there, there's a part of our spirit that is lacking. And so we're trying to fill it with whatever it is. And we don't know, like you said, you don't know you're crippled. Often you don't know. And so you're just trying to remedy things. And I was doing that with my life. And I knew it was a bad formula because I would accomplish something, or I would get a promotion, or I would, buy a new car or a different house. And instead of feeling better, I felt not worse, but I didn't feel better. I felt like this isn't the solution. And the more that I, went through school or tried to fill the things with even just like parenting, or I was self-willing, going to cheer competitions. There was times I didn't want to go and I wasn't present in the moment, even though I really wanted to be. I didn't know how. I was so caught up in my own thoughts and my own worries and my own, what am I going to do next? Or my plans and my designs. And I knew that, but I didn't know how to get out of it. And so when you were talking about you're restored through like turning over your defects, and like the steps tell me that I'm going to get a connection to God. So that place in me that was lacking God and making me sick is going to become more and more well. And so when I'm present and I'm there for the moments that are happening, like that's because I'm trying to connect to God, and he's not making it hard for me, even when I'm sometimes making it hard for myself. And like when you were talking about you don't need that today and you don't define that today, it's like I could if I disconnect from the program. I like the only reason that I don't get bothered and shaken by the things that used to is because I try to include God where God needs to be, and only then am I, trying to be or close to being the authentic person and the healed person. And the healed person or the spiritual person can make better decisions without willing, because you have the power of God. And so I think that closely connects to the emotional balance piece, because when I'm connected to God, the world can go all around me, right? The calamity and the serenity, and through God, I can be calm in the storm. And so that's the second piece, or like, I think the main piece, but like physical sobriety is the first piece, so to speak. But the main point is the serenity and the emotional balance, and then the purpose, like helping others. And so if I'm not connected to God, and if I'm not turning over defects, I'm blocking the channel, and I'm not connecting to God, and then anything around me can blow me around. And when we talk about a daily reprieve, like I think about when I'm not consciously trying to connect to God through prayer throughout the day, or if something comes up and I don't take the time to actually do the steps around it to remove it, like talk about it and pray about it and then move on. If I don't do those little things, something small can annoy me, when the next day, if I'm doing the things, the same thing can be like, why was that bothering me? So that's like the examples of the things that can blow me around on a day that I'm not connected to God. Well, it could be anything. It could be the guy that's jaywalking on the street. It could be, the phone call that I didn't want. It could be all the things. But when I'm connected, it's like those same things don't faze me at all. And it is the solution that I was looking for through alcohol. Like, I didn't know that I was trying to have a spiritual connection, but it was the same type of like fix. So if I was driving to the liquor store and I was in just this mood and I was restless, irritable, whatever, and a jaywalker walked in front of me, and I'd be, swearing and maybe giving him the finger or whatever, get to the liquor store, buy some alcohol, drive home, almost hit him on the way home, say, and I'm waving at him and I'm like, hey, it's okay, I got you. And and I slow down. And so alcohol was doing the same type of thing, except it came at a high cost. And so God today does those things. He alleviates the things that alcohol used to alleviate for me without all of the problems. And in the same way that like alcohol, the blank mental spot, like it can come back, and there's a solution to get out of it. And the more that I notice how quickly it can happen, and that humility piece for to just pray with somebody, or like these solutions that I never would think that would ever be solutions for me, is like how I get by on hard days now. So that's all I have.
Okay.
Here we go. Step 7, page 72. True, most of us thought good character was desirable, But obviously good character was something one needed to get on with the business of being self-satisfied. With a proper display of honesty and morality, we'd stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our chase of what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for, whether our instinctual needs were met or not. We never thought of making honesty, tolerance, and true love of man and God the daily basis of living. So just kind of going back again in my life when I fucking pulled this stuff into my life through this book, and I was reading it at about 3 years sober. I figured out, I guess, tonight. You'll hear other podcasts that I do where I say 2 years or whatever. So I don't know exactly where it was, but somewhere around 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. And I read these lines and they were super profound to me at the time because I'd already given, my buddy Jesse says this at meetings sometimes, and I've stole it. If you think these books are some guy's opinion or theory, I fucking feel sorry for you. So at that point, I had not taken Bill W. and Dr. Bob's writing, mostly Bill W., as a theory or an opinion. I took what he was saying for word by that point. And like, I knew there was a spot in me that said, I'm just going to live my life to the way this book says it. Like, you know, one of my speakers, Janine H, he talks about he was born without something within himself. And he had been looking for that thing his whole life, in the bottle and the drugs and the women and the everything. And that's my experience. I was born without something and I found it in this material. I found it through the practical application of living this stuff. And by the time I got to this struggle in my life at 3 years, and like, just for anyone's in their first 3 years, my first 3 years were fucking hard ass. Really hard. A lot of pain, a lot of fucking struggle. But I went through it, man, and I grew and I learned, and that was the darkness. That was the pain. So you got to, man. And if things are good for you right now, fucking that's okay, but it will pass also. Because what's coming up is in your subconscious. That stuff and the old patterns and all the grief and the loss and the shame, that shit's coming up. So you got to be ready for it. That's why work in a real program, and don't think that you've gotten past it. The minute you think you've gotten past something, God will say, no, you haven't. Here you fucking go. I'm going to show you who's boss. So that's the humility that we need also. But good character was something one needed to get on with the business of being self-satisfied. That's how I used to live. With a proper display of honesty and morality, we'd stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted. So I'd made a surrender in around that 3 years. And when I read that line, I was like, no fucking way. If I stay honest and moral, and I stand in that and I work with that only, I get what I really want. So I tried it and it worked really, really well. And then I started realizing when I was sponsoring guys, I'm like, fuck, what does everyone even really want anyway? When you ask somebody what it is they want out in this world that we live in, they're all going to tell you some really surface shit. Okay. That's because the character isn't built. The authentic person isn't built yet. But when you ask people who've done this program for a while, what do you really want? What you'll always find is they want to be loved and they want to be able to give love. And they want to be secure in who they are and their path of life. That's what they really want. So if you can really, in all your activities in life, let's say it's at work and you got to be dishonest, or you're applying, you're new in recovery and you got to apply and you have a shady past and you think you need to hide all that shit. No, you don't. You know, whatever it might be, a criminal record or whatever, don't hide that shit. If it comes up, I'm not saying run around and tell everyone all your shit. I'm saying with a proper display of honesty and morality, you stand a better chance of getting what you really want. And as you go into the job interview and they ask you some questions and you don't really want to tell them something, but you can feel that consciousness, that God consciousness in you saying you can't lie. If you lie, you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay for it in dishonoring your own consciousness. You will shame yourself, and you'll probably pay for it in other ways. So you just tell the truth. And through the truth, maybe you don't even get that job. So the expectation that you had before you even went for that job, or maybe it's a partner. Like a lot of people will tell little white lies as they're getting to know people so that they can see them in a different light. But you can't do that. You have to be honest and vulnerable and tell them the fucking truth. Because you will get what you really want. And maybe you won't get that person. Maybe they judge you because of that. Maybe the job judges you. That's where you learn humility. You didn't get what you wanted. But you fucking didn't sell out your soul for a lie either. So you fucking learn the lesson and you learn humility and you start gaining in humility. And then down the road, you've learned how to be honest and vulnerable and moral in all these circumstances. And now your consciousness rises. And now your water level of recovery, your consciousness rises. So now you're not only having things that are a higher quality being delivered to you, you're a higher quality because you're attracting that. So that's really important. And I know a lot of people think that they still need to lie and still be a little dishonest and blah, blah, blah. But you don't need to. Is Audrey on here still? Audrey, can you come on for a second and talk about this line? Because I know that you have really just done this and it's paid a lot of dividends in your life, right? And you're only a little over 2 years sober, but you've taken like what I'm talking about tonight and you've applied it in your life, and especially this line, right? A proper display of honesty and morality, and you stand a better chance of getting what you really wanted. Are you able to share on that for a couple minutes?
Sure. I think because my whole life I didn't even know the word honesty, right? It was just a word I read or I heard. So not only by digging into my recovery and thank God meeting you and Janine and the rest of this circle here, I was actually able to really look at what my honesty and what my truth is, and to just really give it all to God and say, you know, this is what I need. This is who I was, and I don't want to be that person anymore. I need you more than anything. And, you know, letting go of, well, I can't say letting go. I just let down my guard regarding God. And it just seemed to naturally happen, right? It wasn't like, okay, it's going to happen at this time, it's going to happen at this time, and when it does, I'll do this, this, and this. It just, you know, the way God provided the lessons, no matter what they were, whether they were the good ones, the bad ones, the hard ones, the sad ones, I really had to hold on to how honest I could be in my love for him and his love for me. And then not only that, but showing it outwardly and not just letting it be something inside of me that people didn't know about, right? So it came out in a way that I still don't see it. And I just had to talk with my sponsor about this last night. I don't see it, but others do. And I think that's also what guides me with that humility. I don't, and I'm talking about that self-pity part, right? Like that was my whole first year and a half. I did not know how to live without that self-pity. And now I can recognize when it's there. I can recognize between that, whether it's coming out of a depressive episode or my grief. So, you know, that's when I get a chance to kick my own ass or say, oh, what would Bill say? Or what would Janine say? Or what would somebody else in this group say or do? And most importantly is what would God have me do? So that's where the honesty and my connection with my higher power came in as the biggest asset, because I did go through one of the most painful parts of my life. And the first thing I did was I went to God. I did not even think about going for a bottle or having a sip or going to the wrong group of people I used to hang out with. It was all in, what would God have me do? So that's how I know putting these principles and these steps and all of what I learned in these rooms is putting them into my life and actually using them. And then having that reminder, like you said earlier, right, is I can recognize now when there's a moment of like, oh yeah, that's for some validation, or hey, look at me kind of a moment. And then it's like, no, okay, that's not who I am anymore. So let's change that up a bit. Anyways, thank you.
Awesome, thanks. And why I used Audrey here is because, and she brought up a few good points. Like Janine's the one who works with her primarily, but Audrey uses a whole bunch of us that are in this group and some that aren't right here right now. But she understands like the benefit of and how hard she's worked at trying to reach out, because reaching out wasn't natural for me or Janine or Audrey or any of us, but it's actually one of the biggest, hugest key components to a proper display of honesty and morality. Mm-hmm. It's one of the hugest pieces of recovery, is reaching out and relying on others and having somebody else show you the damaged and saleable goods and discard them without regret. And I know many times I've been privy to, some of what Audrey and Janine have talked about in their sponsorship relationship. And I know Audrey's admitted certain things, right? Like I have with my sponsor, and suffered that humiliation and the pain. And fucking being willing to work through that over time. And that's where it is. That's how we attain a greater sense of this humility that can carry us through any emergency. It can meet the faith that can meet any emergency, like we're kind of describing, right? So
I just wanted to say, like Audrey had a point in recovery there where she just needed to tell me something. She just like, I need you to come in and I need to talk to you. And I was like, geez, like this looks rough. Like I was bracing myself for all kinds of different things. And we go into the house and it was like really not that big of a deal. Hey, Odd, like not really. But and it was just, the lesson I learned through that was it's way better to face the monster. I've talked about that, where if you don't face your fear, it just remains that monster in the closet. And if you don't open the door to check the closet for the monster, that could be anything. It could be an infinite number of situations of monsters. And so that's worse. That's way worse. And so things I don't think are ever as bad as I imagine. And they're certainly never as bad as people think it's going to be when they tell me something. And so it's like that day, her build up towards what the actual situation was, was just like, we torture ourselves with the monsters behind the door, and there's only the monster behind the door. There's not 1,000 of them. And until you open the door, you're contending with an infinite number of monsters. So you just got to open the door, face the damn thing. And then you know what you're working with. And so that was the day that I would say like she changed her whole program, because it was something that was, in the closet. And until she could bring that out there, you can't be 100% honest. And so you're just not going to get the results. And so that was a big turning point, I think, for her program.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's keep going. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, character building was lost in the dust of our chase of what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something to be desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for, whether our instinctual needs were met or not. So when we first read the last page there where it talks about once everybody's primary instincts are satisfied, there won't be much left to quarrel about. The world will turn happy and be free to concentrate on culture and character. That's kind of what it's getting at here. seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for, whether our instinctual needs were met or not. So to live in character versus not getting what it is, to doing what's right at all costs, and I may lose out on something. I may lose out on looking good. I may lose out on the woman. I may lose out on, a group of guys and my status within that group. Maybe I'm at work and there's a lot of force and pride and, manipulation going on at work. Am I going to stand in my value? Or am I going to sell out my value, my soul for this thing outside of me? Maybe it's the bonus. Maybe it's, the gossip. Maybe it's something. Am I gonna sell that out and strive for this character building instead? We never thought of making honesty and tolerance and true love of man and God the daily basis of living. Again, another profound line in my recovery. I never thought of making honesty and tolerance and true love of man and God the daily basis of my living. And I remember at like that 3-year mark or whatever, 2-year mark, whatever it was, going, is that the fucking really the basis of living? But like I said, I was already sold on this literature. So I was like fucking pondering, is that the basis of life? Loving man and loving God? I never really lived like that before. I only loved a few of the closest people around me. And for the rest of them, they could get fucked. And I just wanted stuff. And I wanted to look good. And I wanted money. And I wanted all this stuff. So this kind of hit me right in the heart. And I was like, wow, maybe I should try that. Like that. So this next paragraph is super deadly. It has a whole bunch of like really important information, but it's the same information. It just goes over it a little bit differently. Okay, so I want to read it here. This lack of anchorage to any permanent values, this blindness to the true purpose of our lives, produced another bad result. For just so long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively by our own individual strength and intelligence, for just that long was a working faith in a higher power impossible. This was true even when we believed God existed. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs which remain barren because we are still trying to play God ourselves. As long as we place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon a higher power was out of the question. And here is humility, as described by Bill W. The basic ingredient of all humility, a desire to seek and do God's will, was missing. So going back to the top of that paragraph, this lack of anchorage to any permanent values, this blindness to the true purpose of our lives, that's the true purpose of our life. True love of man and God, that is it. And like making that switch in our lives and like really going for that, that's really important. And then we turn from the boy to the man in the step 6. We're not seeking the self-determined objective anymore. We seek a perfect objective, which is based in love and based in our God. God is love. So everything starts becoming out of love. But that only happens if you're aware of self and you understand self. And you can relinquish self in those moments. Okay? Or you just surrendered and now you, without reservation, you're just doing something different. For just so long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively on our own individual strength and intelligence, for just that long was a working faith. Notice it's a working faith in a higher power impossible. So it's saying the concept of God, if you fucking are just working this program and you have the idea of God and you pray to the idea of God, that's not enough. Because it's not a working God and it's actually impossible. It doesn't work like that, okay? This was true even when we believed God existed. Okay, so now I'm going a little bit another notch higher in my quest for God, essentially. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs. Maybe I have the beliefs. Maybe I'm on my knees. Maybe I'm doing these things. Maybe I'm going to church. Maybe I'm going to sweats. Maybe I'm doing some of the things, okay? Which remain barren because we are still trying to play God ourselves. That's really that's the most common God in the program, is the one where you believe that you're turning it over, but you're still playing God yourself. And that idea remains barren because it's actually not a working faith in a higher power. It's a conceptual God that we have the idea, but the ego loves to attach to ideas because it needs validation. But through the practical application of learning how to turn it over, not guessing, we can. But learning how to turn it over involves understanding self, okay? As long as we place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon a higher power is out of the question. Okay, so what did that mean for me? That was the one that stuck me. It punched me right in the face at that 3-year mark. Because I really believed I was turning my will and my life over, and I wanted to. And then as me and Jesse were reading this, I was like, fuck, man. When I place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance on a higher power is out of the question. So God is everything or he is nothing. I always thought God was everything for me at that point. But then I was like, well, I'm not turning over my work life, financial life, or my relationship life to God. I could rationalize and say I was, but when I got rigorously honest with myself, I knew that I wasn't. And I was like, okay, well, I'm placing self-reliance first. I don't trust God in my relationship life at all. I can tell people I do, but the reality is I know the truth in here because I can feel it and I know it. And I knew that I wasn't. So then when I read that, I was like, you can do better. And then it did something inside of me again. And then I wanted to turn it more over to God. So I really tried to amp it up and turn more over to God because I didn't want self-reliance. So I took it like, okay, if God is everything or God is nothing, and I'm placing self-reliance first, well, God's fucking nothing. And it was remaining barren. Anyway, that basic ingredient of all humility, the desire to seek and do God's will was missing. It was there, okay? I'd had a desire to seek and do God's will, but there was big pieces still missing. It was that crippling handicap that we were talking about. I had lacked a perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first. And I hadn't actually had that full perspective change yet. But I started getting it. And that line was a huge, huge part of that for me in my recovery. Anything?
When I did AA the first time, honesty is like the thing, this is the H in how. And I had started this job that I didn't want, but my sponsor told me to take it because it would give me humility. It was minimum wage, it was at a gym, and I was cleaning. And I was living with my best friend, crashing on her couch because I was going through a breakup. And I left to go to this first shift. So I go to this shift and I realize I dropped the key somewhere when I was getting out, and I had the key from when they hired me to get in. And so I'm looking for this key and I couldn't find it. And I was really needing this job. And so I called my sponsor early in the morning, woke her up, and she's like, what do you mean? What do? You just be honest. And so I was driving there and there was another girl that was starting, and we were having also a staff meeting. So everybody was going to be there. So I'm in my head and I'm like, just how loud the thoughts go. So it was like, you don't want this job anyways, just who cares? Just don't even show up. And it was like, no, you ought to do the right thing. You got to be honest. And so it was like a 12-minute drive, and I was going back and forth with like all these excuses were coming up and just things I could say and why I lost this key. And it was bonkers, like how hard it was to just be honest. And so anyways, I got there and I had concluded that I would be honest as an experiment, and I didn't want the job anyways, so therefore I had nothing to lose. So I got there, and we're in this meeting, and the other girl was there with her key, and so she let me in. I didn't say anything, and this meeting starts. And at the end, I kind of piped up and just threw it out there that I lost the key and this and that and this. So my boss goes, "Oh, you didn't lose the key. You dropped it, and I picked it up this morning. I thought it was yours." And I was thinking, holy crap, like, thank goodness that I just told the truth, because none of the lies included me dropping the keys right in front of the door and my boss picking it up. So she would have known I was lying anyways. And so that was like a big moment for me to realize like that the truth actually was the better choice, which is also, it's ridiculous how much lying goes on in addiction, but in my own mind. And so it sounds like it's a small story, but it was like very convincing for me. And now when Bill says that this stuff is something that he really believes, and I feel the same way, and some of that came from Bill first, but watching him do this stuff with conviction, and then I started doing this stuff, and more I feel the same, that, you know, this doesn't lead me astray, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about when you're connecting to a higher power and you're not playing God. That looks like, to me, it's like, I was thinking about that job that I totally thought I got, right? And at the end, they were talking about how you would need certain checks or whatever. And so I just said, you know, I moved to Calgary because I am in a separation and I went to treatment, and I just was honest because that was going to come up anyways, right? And so I didn't get the job, and it was like the third or fourth like round. It was the end. And so they called me, and she's like, "Yeah, you didn't get the job." And I figured, because it had been not yet 2 years, right? But it didn't shake me. Like, I was just like, okay, well, then I wasn't supposed to get the job. And that's because I really believe like God has it figured out. And so like, if I didn't say anything, I wouldn't have gotten the job, because I would have had to give the record or whatever, right? But I didn't feel like I had lost anything. I thought there was something better for me, and then there was, right? And so it's like, for me, when I'm playing God, I'm just trying to think I know what's best, period. And so sometimes that looks like I don't want to say something because I don't want to hurt the person's feelings, or I don't want to. And so the dishonesty and the failure to act, like, you end up hurting the person's feelings more, I think, in the long run, when you're dishonest. But it's all these small moments where you just like, you choose to use God and do the thing that you should do. And I've seen that it just has a way better result. And so in seeing that in your own examples as I'm talking, if you can think of times when you've like thought that things were going to go really bad and that monster in the closet was going to destroy you, and then you didn't. And like, really, like, I in working with people, I try to really point out these things, because I've learned that people, if I ask them like, what's a turning point for you in like step, like Audrey last night and I, when we were chatting there, like, so the ways that she sees things is not the way that I see things. And I found there's so much value in like getting together and saying like, hey, what was your turning point on like step 3, say, and listening to what a person has to say about that, the things that are profound for them. That's not the things that I would identify from an objective standpoint. And to like reflect back to the person, or like, so if you have a sponsor, like, ask them, you know, what do you see? Like, what are some of the wins for me that you've seen, or me like overcome some things? And I bet you they don't have the same answers as you, but all these examples, having these conversations, are evidence that this program is working for you and is doing something in your life. And that's the stuff that, like what we were talking about earlier, where we collect those faith pieces that allow us to do the hardest things in the emergencies, because those are the proof that you need to hold on to when you're actually having to come up against, like, yeah, I talked about a key on a job I didn't want, and that was a big deal, but that was like my ego yelling, but it was a big deal because I got my first faith piece in that. And like, that was like something I'll never forget, is how that felt. And so collect those and really pay attention to them, and talk about them with your sponsor, because when your faith is like wavering, those are the things that are the evidence that God is working, even when it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere, or that anything is even happening.
Awesome. Okay, and so we're going to kind of get into what we've been just talking about here. For us, this process of gaining a new perspective was unbelievably painful. The perspective from step 6 humility to step 7 humility. For us, this gaining this new perspective, this change of character, change of viewpoint was unbelievably painful. Okay, that's a promise. It's going to be fucking hard. It was only by repeated humiliations that we were forced to learn something about humility. So again, there's some fucking pain. I have to go through the humiliation of making seemingly mistakes, but they're not actually mistakes if I'm really trying to fucking change. But I'm still going to go through it. It was only at the end of a long, long road marked by successive defeats and humiliations and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency that we begin to feel humility is something more than a condition of groveling despair. So using Janine's example where she didn't get the job, and I remember those jobs she was trying to get, but she had grown to the point where she was honest and vulnerable and moral and just told the truth and didn't get what she thought she wanted. But through her just like accepting and letting it go, she let it go on the deep inside of herself. And then through the letting go, you know, she navigates a little further and fucking she gets what she wants. Because if she would have sold herself out back then and told a little white lie and got the job, she wouldn't have known what she missed out on up the road. Right? So, and as we let go of things deep on the deep subconscious, not intellectually, we actually get what we've wanted. And, you know, that kind of seems like what's happened with her in that area. And it happens in relationships, friendships, relationships, micro moments, huge moments, all throughout our existence. And as we kind of let go of the things that are happening, that's the healing. That's the healing. But it is only at the end of a long road. So remember, a long road. Fucking 1 year recovery is not a fucking long road. 1 year is not much of anything. It's a great start, and you got to start somewhere. And like relinquishing one woman in your life or a man as your woman or man, whoever you are that struggle with the relationships, like one woman and you going, oh yeah, I did it. No, that's one. There's a journey, and through like relinquishing self all along the way, you'll find what it is that you're actually looking for.
Because you get out of the way and you let God do his thing, and you're not playing God by doing that. Like that place, one example is this: when I was moving up here, there was a place that my roommate and I were just friends, and we applied for it and we got it. The lady thought that we were a couple. And it was like, it looked perfect. It was like, had even a dog path right beside it. And anyways, I said to a couple girls I was with, I was like, seemingly we got it. Like, we just wait. It's not done till it's done. And like, I didn't get excited because I had seen enough twists and turns that were unexpected. And so we didn't get it because we weren't a couple. And so people said, well, why didn't you just say you were a couple? How would she have ever known? And I thought, well, then, because I was then going against God's will, and that scares me. Like, what if I would have went into that house and I then went on a path that I should have never been on because I lied to get what I thought I wanted and stopped what should have been?
100%. 100%. And like the unknown of making these hard decisions to do the right thing, it's really scary, right? Because we're trying to control our path and our destiny, but we can't. We got to make that decision, leave the results up to God. And then every day turns into an adventure, right? The fear of the unknown actually turns into the great adventure of the unknown. But that takes a while. It takes like a serious leap of faith to try to do what we're saying. It takes a lot of willingness, open-mindedness, and it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of talking with other God-centered pillars and doing what's fucking hard. If you do what's hard, your life gets easier. And if you do what's easy, seek self-determined objectives and get that immediate payoff of your ego, then life is fucking hard. There's always two kinds of pain in life. There's the unremitting suffering pain of fucking seeking what you want now and selling out your soul for the bullshit. or there's the pain of growth, of not selling yourself out and doing what's hard and building the character. And the payoff for the growth in that way comes down the road. You can't even often, and you don't even know what it actually feels like or looks like. You can think you can, but you can't. That we begin to see humility as something more than a condition of groveling despair. So it changes, right? Humility changes. Every newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous is told and soon realizes for himself that his humble admission of powerlessness over alcohol is his first step towards liberation from its paralyzing grip. So that's an interesting line. So every newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous is told and soon realizes for himself that his humble admission of powerlessness over alcohol is his first step towards liberation from its paralyzing grip. Because the liberation from the alcohol isn't the problem, it's the liberation of these defects of character. Just removing the substance is the first step in the liberating yourself from it, but it's the removal of the defect of character that actually takes the grip off of you, takes the hand off your neck of alcohol that it has on you. So it is first that we see humility as a necessity. But this is the barest beginning. This is Bill W. writing this, remember. To get completely away from her aversion to the idea of being humble. To gain a vision of humility is the avenue to true freedom of the human spirit. To be willing to work for humility as something to be desired for itself takes most of us a long fucking time. A whole lifetime geared to self-centeredness cannot be set in reverse at once. Rebellion dogs are every step at first. Going back to the top, and why did I say Bill W. wrote this? Remember? Because when we talk about humility, you will hear everyone in the program, a lot of people, they talk about humility meaning being humble. Well, Bill W. himself says, let's get completely away from the aversion to the idea of humility being humble. Aversion means intense dislike for it. He's saying, I have an intense dislike for humility meaning being humble. He's like, no. Then he goes on to say, to gain a vision, let's take this up a fucking notch. To gain a vision of humility is the avenue to true freedom of the human spirit. There's a promise. So he's saying, let's take this up to be a desire to seek and do God's will, and let's free ourselves. Let's free our human spirit. Let's get away from these other ideas of what humility is, and let's take humility as this desire to seek and do God's will. That's what he's saying. To be willing to work for humility is something to be desired in itself. Takes most of us a long fucking time. To build character, to do what's hard, to do what's right. That's really fucking hard. It takes us a long time. And why it takes a long time is mostly because the message in the rooms is actually so off track of what we're doing that you just try to guess what you're trying to do. And we're trying to practice the principles. We're trying to self-will the principles. We don't need to self-will or practice anything. We just practice the actual practical application of step 10 mostly, and the results are left up to God. A whole lifetime geared to self-centeredness cannot be set in reverse at once, which is why when you look at the principle of step 10, it is perseverance, because you're fighting through those things, and it's hard to undo the pattern and make a new pattern, and they're not going to be set in reverse at once. Rebellion dogs will be at your every step, but only at first. Why only at first? Because if you practice this without reservation, you're the man, not the boy, and you have a level of willingness and honesty, try repeatedly step 6, step 10 on all your faults without reservation, then it won't take a long time. And the rebellion dogs aren't your every step down the road. They move out of the way because you've practiced this at a higher level. And now, what used to be occasional hunch or inspiration is now gradually becoming a working part of your mind. You come to rely upon it. And that's the God consciousness that you develop through working what we're talking about here.
Another thing that's happening as you're doing this stuff is, like, the more you do it, the more you create those new experiences that you need to create new beliefs. And we talked about just how our old beliefs are the culprit for the beginning of all our problems, right? We think we this and we think we that, and causes us to go do what we think we should, and the best intentions and the bad motives. So these old beliefs, that they really do dominate the shit that's going on in the background. And so every time you have a new experience, and the new experiences are the only way to change your beliefs truly. You can like logically try and think something else and it makes good sense and whatever, but when you have your own experiences to go by, your belief will shift. And so when it says it could take a long time, well, it depends. Are you just using God as a pinch hitter? Then it's going to take a really long time. But if you're bringing God in on all of the things that you see coming up, and you're doing it as best as you can with every little micro moment, you're going to be having a lot of new experiences in your little collection of experiences to change your beliefs. And then the rebellion dogs aren't even tempting anymore, because like, you're convinced when you play God, when you get in the way of what God's trying to do, the outcome isn't, you're missing out. And I'm convinced of that, because I've had enough of the things that have happened that it's easier. And is it still scary? Yeah, there's things that are definitely still scary, but I do believe that that I'm looked out for. And it comes from my beliefs have changed, because I've gotten these new experiences in recovery, and I use the experiences of others as well when I talk to them. So
Okay, let's keep going. So when we have finally admitted without reservation that we were powerless over alcohol, we were apt to breathe a great sigh of relief, saying, well, thank God that's over. I'll never have to go through that again. Then we learn, often to our consternation, that this is only the first milestone in the new road we are walking. Still goaded by sheer necessity, we reluctantly come to grips with those serious character flaws that made problem drinkers of us in the first place. Flaws which must be dealt with to prevent a retreat into alcoholism once again. So a couple things here. The first milestone is the removal of the substance, okay? You know, this is only the first milestone on the new road we are walking. Still goaded by sheer necessity, we reluctantly come to grips that, you know, I got to get rid of these things that I've been using all my life. You know, the relationships, the men, the women, the anger, and all the things that are very, you know, highlighted, let's say. Or I will drink again, it's saying, to prevent a retreat into alcohol once again. So if I act in this spiritual malady, I'll pick up again. Because I don't have a choice. My subconscious retreats back to what it knows, and it picks up what it knows. But first, it's going to pick up the behaviors that it knows, which is why we really got to work on these defective characters. And we will want to be rid of some of these defects because it makes sense. But in some instances, this will appear to be an impossible job from which we recoil. And we cling with a passionate persistence to others, which is just as disturbing to our equilibrium, because we still enjoy them too much. So here's one of the biggest ones: relationships. Again, can't say it enough, you know, or just wheeling men and women to get some type of short-term fix out of it because we still enjoy it too much. What do we enjoy? We enjoy the whole mouse and the cat and mouse game. We enjoy the whole power and losing the power and gaining power and control. It just feeds the ego like nothing else. And then the payoff is, you know, the sex. But once the sex is had, you know, most relationships just fall apart from there because it wasn't based on anything value. There was no principle or values in it. It was all based in fear. It was all based in selfish and self-seeking motives. So of course the foundation of it's not built in anything good. And some of us even know that, and we do it anyway. And that's kind of what it's saying. So we cling with a passionate persistence to others, which is just as disturbing to our equilibrium. It also can be money. That's another big one. because we still enjoy them too much. How can we possibly summon the resolution and the willingness to get rid of such overwhelming compulsions and desires? How? Well, there's a question mark there. I wrote God in mine, in my book, because that is how. But I got to be willing. I got to go back to step 6 and read that first page and go, any person capable of enough willingness and honesty. I got to be willing and I got to be honest, but first I have to have the awareness to try step 6 on all my faults without reservation has indeed come a long way spiritually. I get to grow closer to God through these self-relinquishment, self-sacrifice processes. But again, we are driven on by the inescapable conclusion which we draw from AA experience that we surely must try with the will or else fall by the wayside. If I don't try to remove these things, I fall by the wayside, I pick up again. At this stage of our progress, we're under heavy pressure and coercion to do the right thing. We are obliged to choose between the pains of trying and certain penalties of failing to do so. These initial steps along the road are taken grudgingly, yet we do take them. We may still have no very high opinion of humility as desired personal virtue, but we do recognize it as a necessary aid to our survival. So at this stage of our progress, we're under heavy pressure and coercion to do the right thing. We're obliged to choose between the pains of trying and the certain penalties of failing to do so. So as we're in early recovery and we're in the mix of it, we're under heavy pressure and coercion to stay sober. From who? From our parents, our kids, our families, ourselves, maybe social services, who knows? But there's a lot of heavy pressure and coercion to do the right thing and stay on this path. And in early sobriety, it's really hard to relinquish these defects of character, okay? But as you gain some time in the program, let's say you get 2 or 3 or 4 years, now you're under heavy pressure and coercion from your pillars, your peers, your sponsor, yourself. What, you've learned a thing or two, and to relinquish some of these defects that you're still acting out in, that maybe your peers are now like frowning at you going, fuck bro, when are you going to grow out of that shit? This is a program of fucking self-abandonment. Do something different and get rid of that bullshit because it keeps tearing you down. Get out of those relationships you keep getting into. Quit doing that shit, right? And we're obliged to choose between the pains of trying or the certain penalties of failing to do so. If we don't work on these things, there are penalties. And these initial steps along this road are taken grudgingly. Yeah, who wants to do that? It's fucking hard, man. It's not easy. But we do take them. And we may still have no opinion of humility as desired personal virtue because we haven't had the improved perception. We haven't had the gaining of a new perspective yet because we're still going through the step 6, growing and learning and trying with no actual guaranteed result that this is going to work out. But we trust other people.
Sometimes the grudgingly comes from comparing too, because if I'm doing something that it looks like I'm missing out and other people are like having these relationships or, selling themselves out and it looks like a good time or, the image of whatever's going on social media. And it's like, well, why am I doing these things that are, short-term pain? Where's the long-term gain? And if I'm comparing to somebody's little glimpse, like a page out of their chapter, out of their book that I can't see the whole beginning or the ending, that's not good. And it can get me feeling like the self-pity train and I'm grudgingly taking these things. And so it's not good either.
10-4. And we do recognize it as a necessary aid to our survival. So that kind of comes when you've been around here a while and you keep fucking up and not fucking up, but maybe fucking up. You keep relapse. You keep not getting rid of your bad, terrible sex conduct or your anger, and you don't do the work, right? You finally start realizing that this stuff is a necessary aid to our survival. I have to do more work here. There's a lot of people that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years and have a year or two of sobriety because they're not willing to do these things. Or they have a few years in and they're fucking miserable. And they know they got to get rid of these things, or they don't because they can blind themselves by not talking to anybody and just going to meetings. But when we have taken a square look at some of these defects and have discussed them with another, boom, then become willing to have them removed, our thinking about humility commences to have a wider meaning. By this time, in all probability, we have gained some measure of release from our more devastating handicaps. We enjoy moments in which there is something like real peace of mind. And think about your early recovery, and you're relinquishing, you're trying. There's little moments of real peace of mind. And it's just like, wow, fuck, serenity. You know, we start comprehending the word serenity, not fucking intellectualizing the definition of what we think it means. We get to feel it, because serenity is actually the feeling, right? That's like step 7 feeling. That's God dope. To those who have hitherto only known excitement, depression, or anxiety, in other words, to all of us, this newfound peace is a priceless gift. We've never experienced this. Most people have never experienced this, actually. Something new indeed has been added. Where humility had formerly stood for force feeding on humble pie, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient that can give us serenity. Well, that's pretty cool. You know, something new indeed was added. Where humility formerly stood as a force feeding on humble pie, the step 6 version of humility, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient that can give us serenity. Beautiful. Okay. This improved perception of humility. So again, it's just reiterating the improved perception, the switch of humility starts another revolutionary change in our outlook. Revolutionary change in how we see life. That's what it's talking about. It talks about that in We Agnostics, about the psychic change. We have had a revolutionary change in the way that we see God, God's universe, his fellows, and ourselves. That's what it's kind of alluding to here. Our eyes begin to open to the immense values which have come straight out of painful ego puncturing. What's another word for values? Kind of like a synonym. I'm going to say character. Maybe it's not exactly, but our eyes begin to open to the immense character building that has come straight out of painful ego puncturing. Until now, our lives have been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. We had fled from them as from the plague, whether on purpose or not on purpose, because the subconscious runs from it too. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering. Escape via the bottle was always our solution. Character building through suffering might be all right for the saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. You were going to say something?
I was just like, that is one of my favorite lines. We were running from pain our whole lives.
Okay. Anyway, that's all we are going to do for tonight. We'll finish off the last little piece of step 7 next week.